What if the collapse of a billion-dollar deal led you straight into the arms of the family you never knew you had? James Anderson is the kind of man who always has a plan. As a powerful CEO, every moment of his life is scheduled, until the day it all falls apart. A merger fails. His name's dragged through the media. And in the chaos, two little girls, Ava and Chloe, approach him outside his office with a truth no spreadsheet could prepare him for. "You're our dad." Set against the quiet charm of Rushville, Indiana, this is more than a story about secrets. It's about second chances, missed connections, and the courage it takes to show up when it matters most. As James begins to uncover what really happened, who betrayed him and why he never knew about the daughters who carry his eyes, he's faced with a choice no boardroom could prepare him for. Can a man so rooted in control learn to lead with his heart? This journey will pull you in with laughter, heartache, and moments that'll stay with you long after the screen fades. If you believe love deserves a second chance, hit subscribe and don't miss what comes next. James Anderson wasn't the kind of man who lost control. Not in a boardroom, not on a balance sheet, and definitely not during a multi-million-dollar merger. But as he stood in front of a full-glass window on the 40th floor of his Seattle office, watching the storm roll in off Elliott Bay, he knew something had gone terribly wrong. The merger, the one that was supposed to secure his company's global expansion, was dead in the water. The documents had gone missing. The Swiss partners pulled out. His shareholders were panicking. The board was circling like wolves. James clenched his jaw as the news alert pinged on his phone. Anderson merger implodes. Anderson's empire in crisis. Great. The vultures at the media had already begun the feast. He slammed the screen face down on his desk. "I need Paul," he muttered. His executive assistant had disappeared an hour earlier. No texts, no emails, no callbacks. Typical, James thought bitterly. Paul had grown sloppy, distracted, and now James was left to clean up a mess that felt increasingly personal. He loosened his tie, walked toward the elevator, and pressed the button like it owed him something. When the doors slid open, he stepped inside, ignoring the sting of every mirrored reflection of himself. Today, he looked older, tired. Not the polished tech mogul who graced magazine covers, but a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Outside, Seattle traffic churned under gray skies. Horns honked impatiently. Rain tapped steadily on the windshield of his town car. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Where to, Mr. Anderson?" "Nowhere," James said. "Just drive." He didn't want to go home. Not to the cold penthouse with its motion-activated lights and silent kitchen. Not to the gym where he punched invisible problems into a heavy bag. He needed to think, to breathe. The car rolled down Madison Street. James leaned his head back, watching the raindrops race each other across the glass. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A King County Metro bus idling at a stoplight. Empty. Or so it seemed. Until two small shapes caught his attention. Two little girls were curled up on the last bench seat, asleep. Identical. Same tangled curls, same mismatched socks, same dirty backpacks hugged tight against their chests. He stared, unblinking. The driver rolled his window down slightly, catching the tail end of a conversation between the bus driver and a city worker. "They've been on here over an hour. Nobody's come for them. Said their mom went to find help. Never came back." James's heart dropped. Something in his chest shifted. A long-forgotten ache. He didn't know why he said it, or what compelled him, but before he could stop himself, he opened the door and stepped out into the rain. The bus driver blinked. "Sir?" "I'd like to sit with them, until someone comes," James said. The man looked uncertain, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm calling Child Protective Services if nobody shows in 10. James stepped aboard. The girls stirred, eyes fluttering open. One of them, freckled, a tiny scrape on her chin, looked up and whispered sleepily, "Are you the man from Mom's picture?" James froze. "Excuse me?" She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Mom said if anything ever happened, we should look for you. She said you'd come." He blinked, heart hammering against his ribs. "I think you're our dad," the second girl added softly. James knelt slowly beside the girls, heart pounding in a rhythm he didn't recognize, some strange mix of disbelief and instinct. Their wide eyes searched his face for recognition. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't even sure if he was breathing. "I think there's been a mistake," he said gently. "What's your mom's name?" The freckled one, Ella, as he would later learn, replied, "Sarah Freeman. She said you were in pictures with her from college." James sat back on his heels like someone had knocked the wind out of him. Sarah Freeman. That name landed like a thunderclap. He hadn't heard it in years. They'd dated for most of junior year at Northwestern. She had been warm, funny, always humming under her breath. Then, one day, she just disappeared. He remembered calling, texting, emailing. No replies. Eventually, he assumed she'd moved on, that he'd been one of those college chapters that didn't make the final cut. Now, 2 little girls were claiming to be his daughters. "Do you have anything from her?" he asked softly. "A note? A picture?" Emma, the quieter twin, pulled a crumpled envelope from her backpack and handed it to him. It was worn at the edges and bore his name in Sarah's looping script. His hands trembled as he opened it. "James, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't make it back. I'm sorry. I really tried. These are your girls. I told them who you are and what I know about your life. I never stopped believing you'd do the right thing if you ever knew. Just don't leave them like I did." Sarah, James didn't notice the tears until one hit the paper, warping the ink. The CPS agent arrived 10 minutes later, a young woman named Lydia, calm but firm. "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to step aside while I speak with the girls." James blinked back emotion. "I understand, but I'd like to help, however I can." She glanced at him, recognizing something raw in his expression. "Are you saying you may be their father? I don't know," he said hoarsely, "but I want to find out." That night, James didn't go home. He stayed at a hotel across from the family services office. Through a glass window in the hallway, he watched the twins fall asleep in a waiting room play area, curled up on beanbags with stuffed animals donated by strangers. He barely touched his dinner. He kept thinking about Sarah, her absence, the broken trail she left behind, the silence that had never made sense until now. The next morning, he stood in front of his company's HR database, searching for old assistant logs, staff archives, anything. That's when he found the name. Marla James, his former executive assistant. She'd worked under him during the exact years Sarah might have tried to reach him. Marla had resigned suddenly in 2018 after a non-disclosure dispute. He remembered the incident, brushed off at the time. James pressed a number on his office landline. "Get me a private investigator, today." Then, heart still heavy, he called CPS. "This is James Anderson. I'd like to submit to a paternity test, and I'd like to speak with the twins' legal guardian." A pause. "They listed no guardian," the woman replied. "The girls said their mom left them at the bus stop when she went to get help, and she never came back." A pit formed in his stomach. "Then where's Sarah?" Another pause. "Mr. Anderson, it looks like Sarah Freeman passed away 2 weeks ago. Massive brain hemorrhage. She was listed as a Jane Doe for several days until we matched her fingerprints. The girls were never officially linked. They've been on their own since." James didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stared at the wall, one hand gripping the receiver, the other pressed to his heart, like he could keep it from breaking completely. The silence in James Anderson's penthouse was deafening. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the Seattle skyline, the sun crawling up behind the Space Needle. The city looked calm, deceptively so. Nothing about his world felt still anymore. His phone buzzed on the counter, a message from the private investigator he'd hired just 24 hours ago. Marla James, located, living in Spokane. No current employer on record. Will update. James stared at the screen. His jaw clenched. He didn't care about vengeance. What he cared about now, what consumed him, were the two little girls asleep somewhere in a foster shelter, their mother dead, their lives upended, and him, a stranger with a blood tie and a million questions. He had to see them. By 9 a.m., he arrived at the child welfare office again. He brought 2 small teddy bears, matching ones with the little red scarves, and a handwritten letter addressed to Ella and Emma. He didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but it was honest, vulnerable. Lydia, the CPS agent, met him at the reception area. "They're quiet this morning," she said softly, "still asking when their mom's coming back." James exhaled shakily. Can I talk to them?" "Not as their father. Just as a friend." She hesitated for a beat before nodding. 10 minutes, in the visitation room. Inside, the girls sat on a worn green couch, side by side, legs dangling above the floor. When James entered, they looked up with a mixture of hope and wariness. He knelt down and placed the bears in their laps. "I brought these for you," he said gently. "I thought you could name them." Emma touched hers lightly. "She likes hers. His name's Rocket." Ella gave a tiny nod. "Mine's Comet." James smiled, the knot in his throat tightening. "Perfect. You know, I always loved stars and planets as a kid." "Us, too," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom used to take us to the planetarium." James hesitated, then pulled out the envelope and offered it to them. "I wrote you a letter. You can read it later if you want, or we can read it together." Ella took it, holding it like it was fragile. "Did you really know our mom?" "I did," James replied quietly. "A long time ago. She was kind. She laughed with her whole face, and she made the best French toast." Both girls smiled, painfully, sweetly. "We miss her," Emma said, clutching Rocket tighter. "I know," James replied, his voice catching, "and I can't fix that. But if you let me, I'd like to be here, however you need, as someone who cares about you very, very much." Silence. Then Ella spoke, her words slow and brave. "Are you really our dad?" James didn't lie. He simply nodded. "I think I am. I'm waiting for a test to tell us for sure, but in my heart, I already know." Ella looked at her sister, then back at him. "Okay." It was a single word, but it cracked something open in him. Permission. Possibility. As their time ended, Lydia approached the door and gently called out, "Girls, time to go." "Wait," James said, standing. He looked at the social worker, voice steady but resolute. "I want to file for emergency custody. Temporary, for now, until we know more. They shouldn't be in a system they don't understand. They should be with someone who knows where they came from." Lydia studied him carefully. "You sure about this? This isn't just about guilt or headlines?" James looked back at the twins, then returned his gaze to Lydia. "This is about making up for lost time. It's about keeping a promise I didn't even know I'd made." And just like that, a door creaked open. Not just in the system, but in 3 hearts learning how to beat in rhythm again. The next morning, James waited anxiously outside the King County Courthouse. His lawyer, a warm but assertive woman named Melissa Tran, stood beside him flipping through a stack of documents. The temporary custody petition had been filed overnight. Now they waited for a judge's review. Do you think they'll let me keep them, even just for now? James asked, voice quiet and hopeful. Melissa gave him a measured look. The system doesn't care about your title, James. It cares about your commitment. You've made an impression, but they'll need more than 10 minutes in a visitation room to feel safe placing 2 little girls in your care. James exhaled, nerves prickling. Then I'll give them everything I've got. Just then, Lydia from CPS approached with the girls in tow. Ella held the letter James had written the day before, folded and worn at the corners. Emma clutched Rocket tightly, as if afraid someone might take him. They asked if you could read it to them again, Lydia said softly. James knelt beside them. Of course. He unfolded the letter slowly, heart pounding, and began. Dear Ella and Emma, I don't know what you've been through. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand. But I want you to know I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to call me anything special. You can just call me James. Or, if someday it feels right, maybe even Dad. But more than anything, I want to be someone you can count on. Someone who shows up, listens, and makes you feel safe. You've already given me more than I ever expected. I hope I can give something back. Love, James. When he looked up, both girls were watching him intently. Ella reached for his hand, timidly but firmly. A few hours later, the court granted temporary guardianship. The girls would stay with James under supervision, with weekly welfare check-ins. It was a fragile beginning, but it was theirs. That evening, the penthouse transformed. James, unused to the chaos of children, found himself awkwardly assembling bunk beds with the help of his housekeeper Clara, who didn't bother hiding her amusement. These instructions were clearly written by a sadist, James muttered, screwing in a wobbly rail. Welcome to parenting, Clara said dryly. In the guest room, Ella arranged books on a shelf while Emma placed Rocket and Comet side by side on the pillow. Do we have to call this place home now? Emma asked, not accusatory, just curious. James walked in, wiping sweat from his brow. Only if you want to. We can call it a starting line instead. That night, James couldn't sleep. He wandered into his home office, cluttered with past awards, untouched stock reports, and dusty photographs. On a whim, he opened an old filing cabinet he hadn't touched in years. Inside, tucked between tax forms and stale legal contracts, was a faded envelope addressed to Mr. James Anderson. His breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. Leah's. He tore it open with trembling hands. James, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if it'll reach you, but I had to try. They were born today, 2 girls, beautiful, fierce. I named them Ella and Leah. James sank into his chair, the weight of years pressing down on him like a wave. Marla had hidden this. This moment, this truth, was buried because someone else decided he didn't deserve to know. He read it again and again. By the time morning light filtered through the blinds, he had made a decision, not just to fight for custody, but to fight for trust, for truth, for redemption. The following day, James stood outside the modest entrance of Rush Memorial Hospital in Rushville, Indiana, gripping Leah's unopened letter tightly in his coat pocket. His usually steady hands trembled slightly, an unfamiliar feeling for a man known to command rooms of board executives and international investors. But this wasn't business. This was personal. This was everything he missed and everything he hoped wasn't too late. Inside the clinic, a nurse pointed him toward the pediatric wing. Leah stood by a charting desk, hair tied in a practical bun, her scrubs wrinkled from hours of non-stop shifts. She hadn't changed much, still had that fire in her eyes, still moved with quiet urgency. But when she looked up and saw James, her posture shifted. Alert, defensive. "What are you doing here?" she asked, carefully measured. James stepped forward slowly. I needed to see you, and I needed to apologize." Leah crossed her arms. "That's nearly a decade late." "I know," he replied sincerely, "but I just found out about them. About everything. I didn't leave you, Leah. I never even knew." Her expression faltered. "You expect me to believe that?" "I found your letter," he said, pulling the crumpled envelope from his coat. "Hidden. Deliberately. My old assistant, Marla, she kept it from me. She kept all of them." Silence stretched between them, thick and brittle. Leah took the letter, her hands slightly shaking. Her lips parted as she saw the tear marks and faded ink she'd once pressed with hope. Then her voice softened. "I thought you just didn't want to be involved." James looked away, his voice rough. "I wanted to be there. For every diaper, every sleepless night, every first step, and I missed it all." Leah held his gaze, her jaw clenched, but something had cracked. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," James added. "I'm just asking for a chance. To show up now, for them, and maybe, in time, for you." That evening, Leah walked James to the front of the clinic. She didn't say much, but when he offered to pick the girls up for school the next day, she nodded. The next morning was chaos, in the best way. James arrived early, armed with 2 glittery backpacks, 3 banana muffins, and a thermos of lukewarm coffee. Leah hadn't asked for, but took anyway. Ella insisted on playing DJ in the car, choosing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star remixed with hip-hop beats. Emma sat beside her, practicing how to spell astronaut for a spelling quiz. "Do you think astronauts cry in space?" Emma asked seriously. James glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I don't know," he said thoughtfully. "But if they do, I bet they wipe their tears with stars." The girls giggled. Ella whispered, "You're weird." "I get that a lot," James replied, smiling. After school, they visited a local planetarium. The dome darkened. Constellations lit the ceiling, and the girls gasped as a nebula swirled across the sky. James sat between them, shoulders touching, hearts finally opening. During the car ride home, Ella mumbled, "You don't feel like a stranger anymore." And Emma, sleepily leaning against her sister, added, "Yeah, you feel like our person." Back at Leah's apartment, she met them at the door. "They had fun," James said quietly. Leah looked at the girls, who buzzed about Saturn's rings and a gift shop astronaut plushie named Orbit. She smiled, a small, reluctant thing that held more truth than any words she could have offered. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. James nodded. "Wouldn't miss it." As he turned to leave, Leah called after him. "James." He stopped. "I'm glad you didn't stay gone." He didn't answer, just smiled, eyes soft, heart heavy and healing. For the next few weeks, James fell into a rhythm that was foreign yet fulfilling. Every morning began with cereal debates, Fruit Loops or oatmeal, and twin giggles over mismatched socks. His schedule, once rigid with quarterly projections and board calls, now flexed around art class show and tells, juice box negotiations, and morning drop-offs at Rushville Elementary. At first, Leah hovered at the threshold, watching, protective, guarded. But slowly, cautiously, she began to ease. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when she found James on the floor of her modest living room, a glittery crown slipping sideways on his head. The girls were painting his nails neon green and telling him stories about a teacher who made up songs about fractions. "They said you used to hate messes," Leah remarked, leaning on the doorway. James looked up, smiling sheepishly. "Turns out, I hate missing memories more." That night, the 4 of them sat on the couch eating popcorn straight from the bowl. Ella tucked under James's arm, Emma curled into Leah. They watched an old animated movie where a dog flies a plane and saves the world. The girls laughed so hard their cheeks hurt. and when the credits rolled, Ella whispered, "Can he stay over? Just once?" Leah hesitated, her eyes flicking to James, who waited quietly. Then she nodded. That first night, James slept on the couch with Orbit the astronaut plushie tucked under his chin. Emma's idea. At 2 a.m., he woke up to soft footsteps. It was Ella, dragging her blanket behind her. "I had a bad dream," she said, voice trembling. He lifted the blanket and held her close. No questions asked. In the morning, Leah caught them both snoring under a throw pillow fort, Ella's tiny hand tucked into his. She didn't say anything. She just brewed extra coffee. A few days later, James drove the girls to school again. As he buckled Emma's seatbelt, she looked at him and asked, "What does it mean when your heart feels too big?" James blinked. "What do you mean?" Like it might burst, but in a good way." He smiled slowly. "I think that means love, sweetheart. Or maybe joy." She nodded solemnly. "That's what I thought." The shift came in a moment so simple it could have gone unnoticed. Leah was running late for work, fumbling with her keys and phone while trying to tie her shoes. James stepped in, gently brushed her hand aside, knelt, and tied them for her. She paused, stunned by the intimacy of the gesture. No grand speech, no bouquet of apologies. Just a man who was here, present. Later that evening, after the girls were asleep and the house wrapped in quiet, Leah stepped onto the porch where James stood watching the stars. "Remember how I used to say I didn't believe in second chances?" she asked softly. James nodded. "I do." "I was wrong," she whispered. He turned toward her, careful not to rush the moment. Leah took his hand. "You've become someone I trust, James, and that means something." "I won't let go," he promised. They stood there for a while, the night air cool and crisp, the quiet full of things unspoken but deeply felt. From inside, Emma stirred and called out sleepily, "Daddy?" James looked at Leah, eyes wide. She gave a soft, tearful smile. "You should go." He nodded and stepped inside. That night, he sat beside the girls until their breathing slowed, until the house settled into stillness. Then he leaned back against the wall and let a single tear slide down. It was the first time in years he didn't feel alone. The morning after, Emma called him Daddy. James sat at Leah's kitchen table staring into a mug of lukewarm coffee, his hand still marked with sparkly blue ink from last night's bedtime drawing. It wasn't just a nickname to her, it was a door, flung open, wide and trusting, and he felt the weight of that title like a crown and a compass all at once. Leah walked in, hair damp from a shower, a tired but soft look on her face. She poured herself coffee, sat down, and, for a moment, they just sat. Two people who had been broken in different ways, now cautiously piecing something back together. "I used to imagine you," she said, not looking at him. "Not the man on the magazine covers, but the version of you I hoped still existed. I never thought the girls would meet him." James swallowed hard. "I didn't think I'd ever deserve it." Her eyes met his. "It's not about deserve. It's about choice." Later that day, James took the girls on a surprise trip to the same bookstore he used to wander in as a college student when Leah still lived in his dreams. The girls ran down the aisles wide-eyed, picking out dog-eared copies of books that smelled like memories. Ava grabbed a fairy tale about a prince who lost everything but found a family. Chloe chose a book of astronomy facts, because the stars don't lie, she said matter-of-factly. On the way home, James stopped by a quiet park and they ate grilled cheese sandwiches on a sun-warmed bench. He watched them chase each other, their laughter rising like wind chimes in summer air. And for the first time in years, his chest didn't feel hollow. Back at Leah's place, he helped with dinner. The kitchen was loud and chaotic, pasta boiling over, the girls arguing about salad toppings. But it was alive. And when Chloe pulled him aside and whispered, "Mom sings in the kitchen when you're here," he felt something shift. That night, James tucked them into bed. As he turned to leave, Ava reached out and held his wrist. "Promise you'll still be here tomorrow?" He kneeled beside her bed, brushing a curl from her forehead. "I promise. As many tomorrows as you'll let me." In the hallway, Leah was waiting. "They're sleeping easier now. They used to fight it. Said dreams were too lonely." "I know that feeling," he said quietly. She nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "You've changed." "I think I just finally showed up." There was silence, thick but warm. Then Leah said, "They've been asking if we can all go to the winter festival. It's small, just lights and cocoa and a few crafts." "I'll clear the day," James said without hesitation. At the festival, he carried both girls on his shoulders at different times, bought them matching mittens, and watched them laugh as Leah guided them through a snowflake ornament station. James caught a glimpse of himself reflected in a glass window, a man with glue on his sweater, glitter in his hair, and a quiet joy that money couldn't fake. A photographer asked to snap a picture for the town paper. They all huddled together, cheeks red from the cold, arms wrapped tightly. Click. A moment frozen. A family reformed. That night, James stood outside Leah's house as snow began to fall, soft and slow. She joined him on the porch, coffee steaming between them. "You don't have to do this all at once," she murmured. "But you're doing it." James turned to her, voice husky. "I'm not just doing this for them, Leah. I'm doing it for me too." She nodded, looking at him not with pity, not with fear, but with hope. "Then let's just keep showing up," she said. "One day at a time." Snow blanketed the street like a secret whispered in white. Inside Leah's modest home, the windows glowed amber, and laughter spilled from the living room where Ava and Chloe sat cross-legged, building a snowman puzzle James had brought earlier that week. James watched them from the hallway, a mug of peppermint cocoa warming his hands, but not nearly as much as the sound of their giggles. He never imagined that happiness could be this quiet, or this steady. Leah joined him with a soft smile, tucking a blanket around her shoulders. "They're getting used to you being here." He glanced sideways. "I'm getting used to it too, in a good way." She nodded. "Consistency. That's what they needed most." James looked down at his shoes. "I wasn't always good at that." "No," she said gently, "but you're here now, and they see it." That night he stayed until the girls were asleep, then lingered at the door. "I should go." "You don't have to," Leah replied. Her voice was calm, but the invitation in her eyes was unmistakable. James stayed. The next morning brought cinnamon pancakes, Chloe's sticky fingers on the refrigerator door, and Ava sneaking chocolate chips into the batter when she thought no one was looking. They all laughed when James pretended not to notice. Later that week, James cleared his schedule for the entire weekend, a first in his career. He traded boardroom calls for glitter glue crafts and bedtime readings of Goodnight Moon. He started to memorize their favorite songs and the exact way Chloe liked her milk. Warmed, not cold. He even called his personal chef to learn how to make Leah's lentil soup from scratch. Meanwhile, Leah began letting down walls she didn't realize were still standing. One evening, while folding laundry, she quietly said, "Sometimes I think about how different everything might have been if we hadn't lost touch." James didn't answer right away. He picked up one of Ava's mittens and turned it over in his hand. "I used to think success was proving I didn't need anyone," he admitted. "Now I realize the real success is knowing I do." They didn't speak for a moment. The silence was not awkward, but full, like two people learning to breathe in sync again. As their connection grew, so did whispers of disapproval from the outside. A tabloid published a blurry photo of James holding Chloe's hand at the winter market. The headline read, "Tech Tycoon's Hidden Family?" Leah's phone buzzed nonstop. People from work, Neighbors and even old college friends reached out with questions wrapped in curiosity and judgment. She slammed the phone down. "They're just kids, James. They didn't ask for this." "I know. I'll handle it," he said firmly, and he did. James released a short public statement through his PR team, acknowledging he was reconnecting with people who mattered, and that his personal life was not for speculation. The media storm fizzled when no drama followed. The truth was too quiet to sell. One night, after the girls were asleep and the dishes were done, Leah and James sat on the couch under a shared blanket. "I keep waiting for you to disappear," she said softly. James looked at her, heart in his throat. "I used to run. I don't want to anymore." Her eyes filled, but she blinked back tears. "I want to believe you." "Then let me keep proving it," he whispered. "Every day, every morning, every bedtime story." The heater hummed. Outside, snowflakes floated lazily beneath a streetlight. Inside, two adults who had lost years began to rewrite their story, not with grand declarations but with steady presence, shared silence, and the kind of love that didn't announce itself, it just stayed. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon. Soft droplets traced slow lines down the living room window, where James sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by crayon drawings, puzzle pieces, and half-eaten slices of peanut butter toast. Ava and Chloe were nestled against him, each coloring diligently in a sketchbook he'd brought over that morning. The air smelled of lemon soap and something warm baking in the oven. Leah emerged quietly from the hallway holding a large, worn photo album wrapped in a faded lilac ribbon. "I think it's time you saw this," she said, handing it to him. James took the album with unexpected reverence, as though it were a fragile piece of time itself. The cover was soft with age, the corners bent. He opened it slowly. Inside were photos he had never seen. Chloe as a baby, gripping Leah's pinky. Ava with a bowl of spaghetti upside down on her head. First steps, muddy rain boots, birthday cakes with just 2 candles, then 3, 4. Every page was a year of his daughter's lives, without him in it. He swallowed hard. "I tried to keep it all," Leah said softly. "For them, for me, for someday." James traced a tiny handprint in blue paint beside the caption, "Ava's first masterpiece." His fingers trembled. "There's a video somewhere," Leah continued, sitting beside him, "of them dancing to You Are My Sunshine. It was their favorite." He couldn't speak. His voice caught in his throat like grief learning how to breathe. He stared at the image of Chloe riding a tricycle down a sidewalk he'd never walked, smiling toward a mother who never stopped giving. "I missed it all," he finally whispered. Leah placed a hand gently on his knee. "You're here now. They don't need perfect. They just need you to stay." That night, after bedtime kisses and whispered I love yous, James returned to the album. He sat on the living room couch long after the lights were off, watching their lives unfold through grainy photos and crooked handwriting. There was one page at the very end, blank, save for a note in Leah's neat script. "This space is for what comes next." The next morning, James brought a Polaroid camera. He snapped a picture of Ava brushing Chloe's hair, another of Leah sipping coffee by the window, then one of all 3 of them, cuddled under a blanket, laughing at something no one would remember, but no one would forget either. He glued the pictures into the blank page. That evening, he tucked the album onto the shelf next to the girls' storybooks, not as a symbol of regret, but as a promise. No more blank pages left unshared. Later that week, as winter loosened its grip, James joined Leah for a short walk through the neighborhood. The girls skipped ahead, arguing over who got to push the red scooter first. "They love you," Leah said simply. "I love them more than I thought I could love anyone," James replied, glancing at her. "And I love you, too." She didn't answer right away. "I never stopped wondering what could have been," she finally said. "But maybe it's not about what could have been. Maybe it's about what we choose now." James nodded. "Then let's choose it. Every single day." At the crosswalk, Ava turned back and shouted, "Hurry up, slowpokes!" They laughed, and James reached for Leah's hand, tentatively at first, then firmly, as she intertwined her fingers with his. They crossed the street together, as a family not defined by a perfect past, but by the hope of a better future. The first snow of the season arrived silently. Thick flakes floated past the window like tiny secrets whispered from the sky. Ava and Chloe were already at the window by the time James arrived that morning, bundled in mismatched pajamas and clutching mugs of hot cocoa that were more marshmallow than liquid. "Dad, it's snowing!" They squealed in unison, the word "Dad" rolling off their tongues with ease now, no longer needing testing. James stepped inside, brushing flakes from his coat, and smiled. "Looks like we've got a snow day." Leah emerged from the kitchen holding 2 mugs. She handed him one wordlessly. Black coffee, just how he liked it. Their fingers touched briefly, and she didn't pull away. Outside, the girls exploded into the yard, shrieking with joy as they dove into powdery mounds. James and Leah watched from the porch, steaming mugs in hand, snow gently settling in their hair. "They've never had a real snowball fight before," Leah said softly. "Last year we had a dusting, but nothing like this." James chuckled. "Well, I've read a few good strategies." She raised an eyebrow. "You Googled snowball tactics?" "Preparedness is part of good fatherhood," he said, feigning seriousness. She laughed, really laughed, and it curled into his chest like warmth in winter. Later, they all built a lopsided snowman together. Ava named him Dr. Marshmallow. Chloe gave him James's scarf, insisting it gave him boss energy. When Leah tried to fix the crooked carrot nose, James gently stopped her. "Let it be messy," he said, eyes meeting hers. "That's the fun of it." She stared at him a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. Back inside, wet socks were peeled off, cocoa refilled, and the living room became a fortress of couch cushions and fleece blankets. Leah curled up on one end with a book, James on the other with the girls draped across him like sleepy cats. Ava mumbled something he didn't quite catch. "What was that?" he asked, brushing hair from her face. "I said, 'This feels like home,'" she whispered. He blinked fast. "Yeah," he said quietly, "it really does." That evening, while the girls slept upstairs, James stayed to help Leah clean up. As they folded blankets in the soft glow of lamplight, Leah turned to him. "You didn't have to stay, you know," she said. "I didn't want to leave," he replied honestly. She hesitated, then asked, "Why now, James? Why are you really here?" His voice cracked as he answered, "Because the silence was unbearable. Because I found something I never knew I lost. And because I love the way they look at you, and I want to be a part of that kind of love." Leah's eyes welled, and for once she didn't hide it. "It's been me and them for so long. I don't know how to let someone else in without fearing they'll walk out." "I'm not walking away. Not now. Not ever," he said, stepping closer. And when he leaned in, gently, she didn't pull away. Their kiss was soft, uncertain, and full of years they would never get back, but also of days still left to build. Snow still drifted outside, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, something else settled. Something warmer, something lasting. The snow began to melt 2 days later, but something else had already settled in. Something that wouldn't thaw so easily. The rhythm in Leah's small house shifted, quiet but undeniable. James wasn't just visiting anymore. He was there, present, attentive, stubbornly committed. Chloe had started leaving her drawings on his briefcase. Ava began slipping him dad coupons redeemable for things like one silly face or 2 hugs before bedtime. Leah hadn't said it aloud, but her smiles lasted longer now. Her eyes met his with a softness he didn't remember from before. One evening, as James rinsed dishes and Leah dried them, he asked gently, "Have you ever thought about moving?" She paused, towel in hand. "Where would we go?" He hesitated, then said, "Closer to me. I found a neighborhood in Capitol Hill, big parks, great schools, space for the girls to grow." Leah's brow furrowed. "That's not a small suggestion." "I know, and I'm not asking for an answer tonight." He looked at her seriously. "But I'm not going back to the life I had before. I don't want to be a weekend dad or an occasional guest. I want to build something. With you. With them." She searched his face. "You're really all in, aren't you?" "I don't know how to be halfway about them. Or you." That night, Leah lay awake long after the house quieted. She stared at the ceiling and thought about everything she'd built on her own. Bricks laid with exhaustion, walls fortified by fear. But somewhere in that quiet, she realized something powerful. Love didn't just build up, it built out, sideways, into places you didn't expect. The next morning, Leah asked the girls at breakfast, "If we had to live somewhere new, what would you need to feel at home?" Chloe barely looked up from her cereal. "Dad." Ava nodded solemnly. "And the porch swing. It has to come." Leah smiled quietly. "Deal." 2 weeks later, moving boxes cluttered the front room. James stood in the doorway, hair dusted with packing tape fuzz, holding a label maker like a weapon. "This thing is oddly satisfying," he admitted, sticking a label to a box labeled "Stuffed Animals, Ava and Chloe, do not squish." Leah laughed from the kitchen. "Just don't start labeling people." "Too late. I already tagged myself as Overpacker-in-Chief." The move was chaotic. The twins turned the new house into a jungle gym before the beds were even set up. James's assistant tried to coordinate furniture deliveries and groceries at the same time, and Leah, steady, overwhelmed Leah, stood in the hallway and cried happy, terrified tears she didn't even try to hide. That night, after the twins had passed out mid-sentence in their new bunk beds, James and Leah sat together on the living room floor, surrounded by half-emptied boxes. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, but her voice wavered. "It's just... I've never let someone carry the load with me. I don't know how to trust that it's not temporary." James reached over, took her hand, and said, "Then let's build something so solid even fear can't shake it." She squeezed his hand back. And in that unfinished room, with unpacked memories and unopened promises still in boxes, they built something else too. Hope. Spring arrived like an apology for everything winter took. In the new house, sunlight spilled through the tall windows in golden stripes. The girls had begun marking their heights on the kitchen doorway. Chloe's name in purple crayon, Ava's in blue. Leah had stopped erasing them. Some things, she decided, were meant to stay. On a quiet Saturday, James found himself in the backyard, struggling with a flat pack swing set. Chloe danced circles around him, offering random bolts and unnecessary advice. Ava sat cross-legged on the grass, sketching what looked suspiciously like a comic about Superdad versus the evil screwdriver. Leah stood on the deck, sipping lemonade, watching them all like a woman memorizing the moment. Later that evening, the 4 of them sat around the dinner table, pizza boxes open, hands greasy, laughter spilling freely. It had become their routine, simple, messy, full of love. Midway through the meal, Chloe reached into her backpack and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. "We made something," she announced proudly. Ava added, "For both of you." Inside was a handmade photo frame, decorated in mismatched beads and glued-on buttons. At its center was a picture. The 4 of them at the zoo last weekend, arms around each other, mid-laugh. "I took it with my tablet," Ava said. "We wanted it to be official." Official? James asked, his throat tightening. Chloe nodded, dead serious. Like family. Leah reached across the table, gently brushing a crumb from James's cheek. They're right. This is what it looks like. That night, after the girls were asleep, James and Leah sat together on the couch. He was quiet, pensive. You okay? She asked, resting her head on his shoulder. He nodded slowly. I spent so much of my life chasing things I thought would make me feel like I mattered. Promotions, stock prices, applause. He looked at her. But nothing ever stayed. And now? She asked gently. He smiled, but his eyes glistened. Now, I don't want anything but this. You, them. A quiet Saturday with half-burnt pizza and a swing set that leans a little. Leah took his hand and said, Then don't run from it. I'm not anymore. Days turned to weeks, then months. There were dentist appointments and scraped knees, dance recitals and spilled orange juice. There were disagreements over bedtime and panic over lost homework. But there was also consistency. There was presence. There was healing. One evening, as summer bloomed, the family sat beneath the stars on a blanket in the backyard. Fireflies blinked like slow magic in the dark. Chloe asked, If we had a storybook, what would it be called? Ava answered softly, The Day Everything Changed. Leah smiled, brushing a curl from Ava's forehead. Or, maybe, The Day We Found Home. James looked around at them, his home, his heart, his second chance, and added, Or maybe just us. That's enough. Chloe reached up, linking her small fingers with his. It's more than enough, Dad. And in that simple, perfect moment, no headlines, no spotlight, just quiet joy. James finally understood something he'd never learned in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. Success wasn't built in skyscrapers. It was built in bunk beds and bedtime stories, in whispered, I love yous and glue-covered photo frames, in staying, not running. And, for the first time in his life, James Anderson felt complete. He didn't just build a life. He built a family.